policing immigrants. We have 4 amazing presentations, and they will be, we have organizer Kari Sarabia from Sac State. We have Marla Andrea Ramirez from San Francisco State University. We have Mercedes Valdez from Sac State, and myself from Sac State, Manuel Barajas. Thank you for making time to come and see this important topic. We will organize it in the following way. We will follow the order of the scheduled presentations. The presenters will have 15 minutes. I will notify them when they have 2 minutes left, and I will do this. And we will leave the last 30 minutes for questions and answers. I won't be a discussant. I will share reflections. And so if we can start with Marla.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. ¿Cómo están? How are you? Good. I want to first thank Heidi for inviting me to be part of this panel, and Manuel for organizing us and keeping us on track. So thank you for being here. The title of my presentation is The Legacy of the Mexican Repatriation, Negotiating Gender, Intimacy, and Family Formations in the Borderlands. This presentation is based on an article that is scheduled to appear late next year, early 2019, more or less, in the journal of, what's it called? The American Public History Journal. I just know the abbreviation. Wait, what does it stand for? Yeah. As part of a special issue on gender and intimacy in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. So this is based on that article. So let's get started. Can you see it right? I have some images, but can you see the images fine in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. A small black and white photograph and a U.S. birth certificate are all that remain bearing witness to Sara Marie Robles' early yet brief childhood in the United States. They serve as a stark reminder of the painful history she and her family experienced when she, at the age of 4, along with her Mexican-born parents and 3 U.S.-born siblings, were sent to Mexico as part of the Mexican repatriation program during the Great Depression, a victim of local, state, national, and international governmental policies and practices blaming Mexicans for the economic troubles of the Great Depression in the United States. Sara Marie, like hundreds of thousands of Mexicans of diverse legal statuses, were removed forcibly and in the process made scapegoats. Mass repatriation took place in the years preceding and shortly following the Great Depression from 1921 to 1944. Though originally intended for the return of Mexican nationals, U.S. citizens, oftentimes the wives and children of the intended population, were caught up in the raids and became part of the mass exodus. In the process, the United States and Mexican governments not only failed to protect, but also violated the constitutional rights of its citizens, believing that the greater good overrode individual rights. Approximately 1 million Mexicans were removed, a startling 60% were U.S. citizens. Mexican repatriation did not only occur in California or the Southwest, as it is commonly assumed. Instead, Mexicans and their U.S. citizen family members were removed from numerous states across the country and sent well into the south of Mexico, as illustrated by this map by Abraham Hoffman's 1974 study. Recent scholarship has updated the demographics of removals, right? Michigan, for instance, is not included here. And Wyoming is not included in this map, right? But in this image, as you can see, the wider the arrow, the bigger the population that was removed from that given state. And so they were removed from all over the United States, different parts, and sent all throughout different states in Mexico, right? The assumption is they were removed from the Southwest, mainly California and Texas, and then landed in the northern region of Mexico, right? But this shows differently. The local city government and welfare agencies organized unconstitutional repatriation programs leading to coerced departures as unemployed people of Mexican descent were erroneously informed that they will no longer receive any public assistance nor will be hired for employment if they remain in the United States. This 1932 photograph was taken in the LA Union Station. Anybody here from Southern California or familiar with Southern California? So you know where the Placita Olvera is, right? And across the street, so the Placita Olvera is this ethnic enclave for Latinos, right? During the 1930s and 1932, when this photograph was taken, there's an infamous immigration raid, mass raid that happened in the Placita Olvera, right? People, ICE, well, at the time, INS, agents, Immigration Naturalization Services, now ICE, came to Placita Olvera, and they weren't wearing their uniforms, right? And so they circle around the Placita Olvera so to prevent people from leaving, and then gather everyone who was there, literally walk them across the street into the LA Union Station, and put them in trains to be removed to Mexico, right? Regardless of the legal status or nationality. And it is in fact, in the archives, there's a case documented of a Filipino man who found himself in this train and in Mexico trying to prove that he's a Mexican or a Mexican citizen, right? And that in fact he had legal status in the United States and trying to prove his eligibility to come back, right? So that proves that it was not planned. It was included racial profiling, right? Anybody who looked Mexican, regardless of the legal status or ethnic background, was gathered and removed without due process. Mexicans were informed that if they voluntarily departed, quote unquote, then the U.S. government, in cooperation with the Mexican government, will pay for their one-way transportation. They will receive $100 and a free farming land or terreno in Mexico to start their lives anew with their families. However, the government failed to clarify that they will also keep their U.S. properties in lieu of the transportation expenses if they had homes or businesses here in the United States. That the $100 will be paid in small installments of $8.33 per month. That is if they could be found, because the trains would just take them to random places throughout Mexico, right? And many of them couldn't be located after the removal. And then the land reserved for the repatriates was not always fertile. It was for the first wave and second wave. But as time progressed, as more people continue being sent to Mexico, fertile land ran out. And so a lot of people, the third and fourth waves, when it was a height of the Great Depression, people needed support the most. They did not have any fertile land for their own subsistence or to create or farm food to sell as a way to support themselves and their families. But most importantly, U.S. citizen minors were unconstitutionally deprived of the legal rights and socioeconomic opportunities if they had remained in the United States, their native country. It is important to distinguish between the different legal terms used for the so-called quote-unquote Mexican repatriation drives in order to better understand the different types of removals. First, repatriation means a return to the homeland or patria, suggesting a voluntary return. Banishment, on the other hand, is the term that I use in my study and refers to U.S. citizens who were unconstitutionally banned from their home country during the Great Depression, challenging the voluntary aspect of repatriation, right? My research pays close attention to the historical moment of banishment of U.S. citizens of Mexican descent to foreground the difference between repatriation and banishment. The theoretical and discursive difference in terminology challenges the Great Depression literature that refers to banishments as repatriations or deportations in some cases, obscuring the systematic policies of exclusion during this time. I employ a mixed methods approach by grounding my research in oral history, archival research, and legal analysis. Oral histories are key here to providing narratives with hidden histories about early 20th century immigration regulations. I examined three generations of familial oral histories, as I refer to them, as opposed to the more traditional individual oral histories. Participants interview our surviving U.S. citizens banished in the Great Depression, their children and grandchildren. Each family member is initially interviewed individually, and later the entire family participates in a focus group. This approach allows participants to recount their life story in relationship to banishment as they experience it. Focus group interviews disclose forgotten or blurry individual memories by having the family reconstruct their history through a communal discussion of the events. The familial oral history approach is also relevant to Mexicans' oral traditions, as family stories are usually passed down while in family circles during events, dinners, and festivities, right? So it's very central to oral traditions within Mexican communities. I also use federal and local immigration archives to collect demographic data. These documents are paired with family archival documents that I mine for my study to provide a specific family demographics and historical information as related to the family's banishment history. This includes birth certificates, family pictures, and letters. The family archives and their oral histories are crucial as they often complement and even challenge the historical records in institutional archives, helping us better understand the contested history and experiences of banishment. The National Immigration Archives in Washington, D.C., for instance, documents through different archive lists the history or the records of people who were removed during the Mexican repatriation program. And so you see here the list of names, you see their gender, their age, their nationality, and their relationship to the person who is being removed, right? So those lists, I enlarged a portion here, so those listed in the red boxes are always US citizens, right? Usually the children and wives of the person who is being targeted for removal. Those outside are usually either the parents or the husbands who are being removed because they are laid off from work. And so when they have no work, they are seen as disposable, right? And so the entire family becomes disposable regardless of the family's legal status. And also the fact that these records decided to document the person's nationality instead of the legal status is telling, right? Because a person might be a Mexican national, but naturalized US citizen, or legal permanent resident, or have a visa to legally be in the United States. But if you don't document the citizenship and nationality, then it also helps you to justify these removals based on the claim of illegality, right? For my study, I interviewed 3 families who had at least one person who was a survivor of banishment, right? That included the Rodriguez family here. Trinidad was a banished survivor. And the Anda Poblano family, Consuelo and Virginia, are 2 sisters who participated in my study. And this is for the book project, right? For this article, I'm focusing on this presentation, I'm focusing on the history of the Robles Villegas family and Sara Marie's history of expulsion. Right? So I interviewed 20 family members from these 3 families who had at least one survivor banished during the Mexican repatriation program. The 20 interviews are supported by additional 40 individual repatriation oral histories archived in the Oral History Institute in Fullerton, California, and the one in Detroit, Michigan, to examine the experiences of removal both in the Southwest but also in the Midwest of the United States. So for the remainder of the presentation, like I said, I interviewed four members of this family, but for this presentation I will be focusing on the experiences of portions of the interviews of Sara Marie, her son Chabelo Villegas, and her granddaughter Sara Veronica Hinojos. One second, there's a pop-up here. Okay. So Sara Marie, who's a survivor, banished as a 4-year-old in 1932. She was living in Pasadena, California at the time with her family, and she was relocated to Zacatecas, Mexico. She says, when I was 4 years old, so I put the Spanish original version here to honor her story, right? But I'm translating for you all if you don't speak Spanish. When I was 4 years old, they kicked us out, my parents and us, 4 siblings. In Mexico, I did not have any schooling because there were no teachers in the little town I live in, Potrero de Gallega, Zacatecas. But I learned to write my name and to read a little bit too. But I never went to school. A person that used to go to my town only for a month, I remember, he had a school in a house there, and they hurry up and take us. But for how long? I did not learn anything, and after having 11 children, without having gone to school, without knowing how to read, I came to the United States and I had to work. When I arrived here, I worked in the sewing industry in a sweatshop. I suffered a lot. Imagine, I used to come here and leave all my children behind. I would ask God to take care of them. I was not here for pleasure, but I had to be here because they required me to have a work letter for the immigration petitions for my children. And she emphasizes that she wasn't here for pleasure, as she was heavily criticized by her family for being quote-unquote a bad mother, for leaving her children behind due to the gender expectations of women to stay at home and take care of their children and their husbands, right? Instead of being the leaders of the migration journey for the families, a role traditionally assigned to men. And this is her sewing clothes for her children in Mexico, a skill that will later help her transition back into her native country and go into the workforce. Her son, Chabelos, remembers or shares in the interview, quote, "After learning more about my mom's history, I started to wonder if she was a U.S. citizen. Why did she have to go through all the trouble of getting us all the green cards a few at a time? Once I learned that if you were a U.S. citizen, your kids automatically are U.S. citizens," celebrity citizenship he's referring to. "But we were seen as your so-called regular immigrants or quote-unquote illegals because for a few years I was here illegally while the paperwork was being processed to get a green card, as her mother ran out of funds and time because the family was separated across the border for 12 years. So she brought the last two children undocumented because she didn't know she could have passed her citizenship to them. And then she petitioned for them the long route, a family petition. I went through the process where I became legalized, what they call naturalized citizen, where you take a test and all that, when I did not have to do that. It wasn't until it was done that I was like, wait a minute, I should be like a double U.S. citizen now. He laughs. And then the granddaughter, Sara Veronica, states, "I remember saying to my mom something along the lines about my grandma being an immigrant. And I learned from my mom saying, oh, ella no es de Mexico. Oh, she's not from Mexico." Almost like insinuating something. But I was like, what do you mean? My grandma only speaks Spanish. She doesn't understand English. My mom was like, no, ella nació aquí. Ella se llama Sara Marie. No, no, she was born here. Her name is Sara Marie. As if the name, an Americanized one, was an indicator of her roots in the United States and her American identity, right? Sara Veronica continues by stating, she also has this picture when she was little, like 3 or 4, and my grandma is sitting at a park bench, and it is a black and white picture. It is so weird to see your family's history in black and white, because for some reason I feel like I belong to history. Because when I think about white and black old pictures, I think about old white people from the 1920s. She laughs, right? And so this is the image, or the picture. It is indeed through family archives and oral history that banished survivors and their families are sharing and learning their long-rooted family's history in the United States, their belonging, and in the process assisting me very generously by opening their stories and their homes. They're assisting me to rewrite this obscure yet important chapter in U.S. history. Thank you.
I think I'm next. Read my paper, I hope you can hear me. Thank you, Marla.
Yeah, thank you.
Just an observation, in the 1930s, an estimate of at least 1 million people got deported from 1929 to 1938. What's disturbing to me is that Mexican immigrants made up only 4% of all the immigrants. Over 90% of the immigrants back then were European. And like you saw, it was not an anti-immigrant removal, it was an anti-racialized removal. And that continues to this date. So the parallels are very important, and we have to highlight that. So, aquí les va, here it goes. And I forgot my glasses, so my apologies if I lose my spot. Yeah, I'm getting old. Okay, this paper examines the title of the paper is Decolonizing Comprehensive Immigration Reform in the Era of Trumpism, with a Z like in Nazism. This paper examines the politics shaping immigration policy and critiques top-down comprehensive immigration reform proposals for largely neglecting, distorting the current global context of power inequalities. Nations' integration in unequal and exploitative relationships are the roots of modern migration and must be understood to advance effective and humane immigration policies. However, this global context is largely ignored, and consequently, reform negotiations suffer from systemic flaws. A major problem with policy negotiations is the exclusion and marginalization of the voices of those at the bottom of racial, gender, class, and national hierarchies. In the era of Trumpism, immigration proposal acts continue to reflect the intersecting interests of feudal colonial hierarchies along the lines of race, gender, and class. The modern colonist economy is addicted to MED, manageable, exploitable, and disposable immigrants, workers. Tragically, mostly descendants and victims of classical colonialism. A lot of people who are getting removed are from Indo-America, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and we're essentially Native American. Just a few generations back in the 1930s, some of our grandparents spoke indigenous languages. And that history has been denied to us in K-12 schools, so that's very problematic. Therefore, this paper seeks to challenge the normalized logics shaping Immigration Reform Act's policies that reproduces intersecting racist, sexist, and classist notions and patterns of who belongs and who doesn't in this country. So here it goes. So beginning in 2006, correlating with Felipe Calderón's Mexican presidency and with the Great Recession, sorry, I forgot this. In the US, violence and homicides exploded in Mexico. By 2012, 6 years later, an estimated 120,000 people had been killed. Calderón's war on drugs in Mexico and the United States Great Recession contributed to this disastrous crisis of violence across the border. The US Great Recession hurt Mexican and Central American export economies, dependent on US consumers. In devastated communities, unemployed youths joined organized crime or sought to escape the misery. Central American children began to migrate in greater numbers in the US around that time. In what follows, I review the politics shaping immigration policy and critique the top-down comprehensive immigration reform proposals for neglecting the global context of power inequalities. Global and national power inequalities must be understood to advance humane and just immigration policies. In 1986, President Reagan signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, IRCA, becoming the first comprehensive immigration reform since the Hart-Celler Act of 1965. IRCA reflected congressional compromises of conflicting interests between capital and labor, economic structural demands, and nativism, and proponents of liberal open society in a more restrictive way. Agribusiness secured farm workers, and labor attained some legalization for workers. Immigrant and civil rights advocates got amnesty for immigrants, and nativists put a cap on it, and got in employer sanctions, fighting those hiring undocumented workers. During this time, a predominantly European immigration from 1790 to 1980 shifted to a mostly Latino, and Asian one by 1990. These demographic changes, particularly after the North American Free Trade Agreement in '94, motivated state and federal efforts to restrict immigration, as seen through the passage of Proposition 187, 227, 209, and of Operation Gatekeeper in California, and the beginning of historical records of deportations in the U.S. Into the 21st century, 9/11 and soon the Great Recession increased the historical records of deportations, averaging about 369,000 migrants a year from 2006 to 2014. These trends created concerns about human rights violations among some and fears about national security among others. In January 28, 2013, senators in Congress proposed a comprehensive immigration reform that prioritized border enforcement, a guest worker program, and earned and restricted legalization path. Soon after, President Obama in his State of the Union articulated a similar proposition and asked Congress to compromise on something that he could sign in February 13, 2013. An illusion of hope was projected to 11 million living in the shadows and their relatives and friends also living in fear of being separated from loved ones. Also exciting those in favor of this reform, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO agreed on a lobbying platform that advanced both of their interests. Their compromise prioritized border security through E-Verify and permitted another form of guest workers, W visas, satisfying corporate interest and promising prevailing wages for labor. The Gang of Eight, however, after listening to their powerful influences, presented a largely unchanged but more punitive reform proposal that secured borders above all, permitted guest workers, and lastly, a restricted and complicated legalization where a great majority of the undocumented would remain disenfranchised and without guarantee to legalize even after 10 years of waiting. This reform Senate bill, however, was too liberal to a predominantly conservative Congress, so it did not go further in the policy process. Immigration and human rights scholars have noted a gulf between the politics of immigration on the one hand and the research-based knowledge on the other. Senate, House, and executive proposals, for instance, reflect a disconnect with the empirical and historical facts about the roots of immigration, and an alarming connection with historical biases evidenced by the trends of who gets legalized and who gets deported. Such reforms reflect power inequalities in the negotiation process, whereby the interests of the most powerful get representation. Consequently, the top-down proposals are viewed by mainstream media, corporate interests, and purported pragmatists as the only realistic approaches to comprehensive immigration reform. Something is better than nothing. Everyone wins something and loses something. Or what I learned today, strategic incrementalism. DACA, and then DAPA, and then like little pieces of reformist legislation. However, these proposals are deficient in at least 5 areas that parliamentize any reform. First, top-down reforms minimize sound research-based knowledge. They prioritize enforcement-only provisions, neglect the central role of U.S. policies in dislocating migrants from their homelands, and thus offer solutions that are ineffective and wasteful of public revenue, undermining the financial stability of the nation. In addition, the economic benefits of immigrants to the larger society have been widely recognized. Enforcement-only policies are obstructive and complicate migrant successful integration into the country. Top-down reforms violate human rights. For instance, guest worker programs are often included in these proposals, though past and present programs have been plagued with human rights violations. Maynagai, Gilbert Gonzalez described guest workers as imported colonial labor and colonized labor because they come from regions that were politically, economically subordinated to the U.S. These guest workers are denied political and labor rights. In 2013, the Southern Poverty Law Center reported systemic violations of labor and human rights of H-2 guest workers by a variety of industries. The center advised that guest workers programs be terminated because they produce a system, quote, too close to slavery, end of quote. 3, in the eyes of many, these reforms are void of courage to confront the politics of intolerance and bias that marginalize people on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and class. Over the past few decades, Latinos have suffered a disproportionate amount of deportations, over 95%, though they only constitute half of the immigrant population. The racialization of who belongs to the nation and who does not has long roots to a history of colonial dislocations of indigenous people. The removal of a generally indigenous population reflects a historical continuity in the alienation of brown people in the Americas, ironically envisioned as illegal aliens. For top-down reforms hurt the health of families and communities by prioritizing policies that deny health care and public services. These policies ultimately create more cost in the form of emergency room visits when individuals are more seriously sick, and hurt the quality of life of all household members irrespective of their documented status. 5, these reforms perpetuate structural violence by investing in border enforcement, secure communities, and detention centers that create a culture of segregation and fear, and that split society with notions of I belong here more than you, I have more rights to be here, I have more rights to exist than you. Corporate and nativist interests support such an immigration industrial complex as a deterrent for immigrants. However, the benefits fall to a private few, in the expense to the larger public, who incur the financial and social costs of top-down policies. Into the 21st century, immigration reform proposals largely reflect the interests of powerful nativist and corporate elites such as the current president. A systemic problem with these negotiations is exclusion and marginalization of the voices of those at the bottom of the racial, gender, class, and national hierarchies. These voices from the bottom speak out and come together as reflected in the largest marches of human and immigrant rights in the U.S. history in 2006, who contested the 2005 Sensenbrenner bill, criminalizing immigrants and anyone assisting them. H.R. 4437 did not pass the Senate, partly because of the success of immigrant rights movements and converging corporate interests that benefit from both low and high-skilled labor. Nonetheless, national power inequalities widened during the Great Recession. That's why Trump won. And clearly hurt working people in the U.S., but more so those workers south of the border who are integrated in a very unequal global economy. Over the past 40 years, U.S. political economic involvement grew in Mexico, Central America, and Asia, and correspondingly, migration from those global regions increased to the U.S. Migration from Mexico climbed steeper after NAFTA and continued even after 9/11, in spite of the billions of dollars directed to the Homeland Security. The combination of border enforcement and the Great Recession, however, paused migration from south of the border. From 2006 to 2014, the United States deported historical records of immigrants totaling about 3.3 million. During this period, approximately 70% of the total deportees were from Mexico, though accounting for only one-third of the immigrants, and about 25% were from Central America, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Since NAFTA, more people have been deported than all the deportations combined since 1892. The deported come from nations that have been historically integrated into the U.S. economy and whose economy largely serve export production for U.S. investors. In Mexico, for example, 80 to 90% of what they produce comes here to the U.S. And during the U.S. Great Recession, when consumer confidence fell here in the U.S., the Mexican export-oriented economy suffered. Poverty rates jumped, with over half of the population impoverished. Violence increased, claiming thousands of lives, and remittances declined, hurting families and descending communities. Similar trends occurred in Central American nations whose export economies are also largely serve U.S. interests. Comprehensive immigration reform must consider the U.S. role in dislocating people from their homeland via policies like CAFTA, NAFTA, and/or military interventions, like in Vietnam in the 60s, Central America in the 1980s, and in the Middle East right now. To address concerns about immigration, U.S. policymakers need to prioritize labor, civil, and human rights across borders. Insensitive to the global realities that cause immigration and to the historical biases denying people of color full membership to the nation, restrictive and burdensome immigration acts effectively violate human rights and keep a large number of immigrants and relatives in a marginalized status for generations. And I guess that the time is right for a world without borders, particularly when global regions have such a long historical and consequential relationships as between Mexico, Central America, and North America. Gracias, es todo.